Um, Marketing and enterprise and how the two meet or don't, as it were, in a school setting is really how I want to approach this discussion this morning. And the reason I've looked at it from this perspective is that enterprise is a fairly new, relatively new initiative within the school space, and something which traditionally has happened in the summer term. In the summer holidays, not summer term, in the summer holes. So traditionally what's happened is schools say, well, we're here to educate pupils, and we do that all the way through the year. And then over the summer holes, we just hand over the school to somebody and they come in and do something, not sure what. And then we're all back at school when we get back to school, and it's all happy days. Things are changing in the schools world, and enterprise is now a 365-day-a-year activity for many schools, and I'm delighted to see that the Mount School is hosting today. So I don't know if they're charging you, but whether they are or aren't, it could be a commercial activity, could be deemed a commercial activity. So it's now moving away from that summer holes, etc., and moving into a full year approach. The other thing that's happening, and I hope it's going to happen more and more, is that it's becoming integrated with what the school does and the school's purpose and sense of strategy and strategic direction, the direction of travel for the school. And if it isn't, in my view, it should be. I was up in Scotland yesterday talking to the Scottish Bursars Association, and 30 odd bursars in the room from schools around Scotland. And I left there with a real sense that, or even those who had been at the commercial game for quite a few years, were stopping to think a little bit more about how it could enhance the school's profile and the school as a whole, rather than it being a separate standalone thing that happened, as I said, in the summer holes. So that's the approach. That's the sort of key messaging I want to get across today. And without further ado, I want to talk about the brand, because at the end of the day, that's what a school is. So whether you're called the Mount School York or Cheltenham Ladies College, who I think are on the call, or West Buckland, who I think are also on the call, it doesn't matter. You are a brand. And I'm going to use Coca-Cola as an example of a brand. Everyone knows it and is familiar with it. And Coca-Cola is part of, as you, I'm sure, know, the Coca-Cola Company. The Coca-Cola Company has a house of brands. It also has within that a branded house, just to be confused. And for those of you who have attended my marketing training programs, you'll know that I use this example in that as well. So why is this important? Because as a house of brands, there are multiple different, I mean, you probably didn't even know that Nestea was, if you ever had come across it, was owned by Coca-Cola or the Coca-Cola Company. You'd have to dig quite deep to find that out. And that's quite an intentional brand strategy from Coca-Cola. That said, within the Coca-Cola brand family, Diet Coke, Coca-Cola Light, Coca-Cola Zero, etc., is Coca-Cola branded within that branded house as a subset of the Coca-Cola Company. And that too is quite intentional. And really what I want you to do today is to think about this from your school's perspective. And I'll give you some examples as we go through the presentation. And think about how it is you describe your enterprise or commercial activities and why. So hopefully you'll leave asking questions rather than having some answers. So they are within the house of brands, there is a branded house. Google have taken a different approach, and Google has a branded house. It has so I always do this. I can't see my screen because I've got there we go. So Google has a branded house, whether you're using what I call a G Sheet, which is a Google Sheet, i.e. their Excel program or Google Calendar or Google Gmail or whatever you're using. You know it's from Google. They intentionally tell you it's from Google, and they want you to know it's from Google. Why? Because they believe Google has developed a brand which, and it has become ubiquitous in the world, and leveraging the strength of that brand is really important. Now, one could argue that the Mount School York, and sorry, I'm using you because you happen to be popped up on my screen as an example, is a brand which is firmly entrenched, and therefore utilizing and leveraging that brand is the right thing to do across the entire piece, rather than just the educational aspect of the school's activities. But you need to stop and think about it from a big picture point of view. Stand back, step back, and have a look at it. And hopefully, if I can get this to move, there we go. So, and I'll bring both of those up. So what you have at the moment is a school which has a number of assets in that school, and it's branded by with the school's identity, whatever that might be. Normally some sort of emblem or something. It may have a strapline attached to it, and it will have a name attached to it as well. And you'll notice that I've divided the school's assets, because that's what I like to call them, into 5 different categories. And this is a very quick thing, a quick piece on enterprise and what enterprise looks like. I divided it into into education, which is the first and foremost asset any school has to sell. I was sort of having a bit of a giggle with the bursars yesterday when I said, and I asked them all to tell me how successful their online programs had been during COVID. I said, would anyone here admit to not having had a very successful online program during COVID? And they all said, oh no, we were excellent. We were really, really good at it. We knew what we were doing and we were really good at it. If you were that good at delivering education online, why are you not still doing that to a different audience? Now, some schools are. Harrow Online developed and grew out of their experience during COVID and is now a successful online offer. But most schools thought about it and didn't move any further. But taking that asset that is your education and creating a commercial opportunity beyond the children who are in your school during term time, absorbing that educational offer is something which many schools can and have done in the past, derived commercial return from, and into the future you may want to consider. The second asset class in any school is the co-curricular asset class. Again, my Scottish example, the home of the Duke of Edinburgh's award is Gordonstoun. Now, I know that because I've looked at Gordonstoun School and it tells me on their website that it is. But I probably don't know that from any other aspect, or any other consideration. Why are they not taking that phenomenal asset, which is a co-curricular offer in that space, and making something of that commercially in the broader world? And many of you will be renowned for various, whatever they may be in the co-curricular space, whether it's hockey, swimming, tennis. Millfield's a good example. I don't think there's a Millfieldian on here, but Millfield, we know, is renowned for sport, and they have done very well at taking their sporting offer and creating commercial opportunity completely aligned with the school's brand. Totally, it's a Millfield equestrian or Millfield swimming or whatever it might be, and really making the most of that phenomenal asset they have in their co-curricular offer. The third asset class that I like to talk about is community and public benefit. And in fact, sorry, this should have been changed, and partnerships. I normally talk about community and partnerships in here. So not only is it community and public benefit work that you need to look at as an asset, because it is an asset. If you aren't doing it, you should be, and you will have some examples of community and public benefit work that you do. But you'll also have examples of partnerships, hopefully, that you're developing, whether it's partnerships with the local community, partnerships with another independent school, or a like-minded school in the near geography, or beyond that, internationally perhaps, or partnerships with commerce and industry, or sporting bodies, or whatever it might be. And those partnerships can be brought to bear on your commercial activities in the school. The fourth asset class that I like to talk about is provenance. And provenance is the come from. What is your history? What's in your history? I used the Gordonstoun example with the Duke of Edinburgh's award. That is part of their provenance. That's their history. It's part of their roots. There are all sorts of other bits of provenance in there, Prince Charles and various other things as well. Let's just stick with Duke of Edinburgh's award. That is part of their provenance. And that rich provenance can be brought to bear on the school's future, and in turn on the school's future commercial activities. So look around your school, take stock of where you've come from as a school, what the highlights are in your past. What have your alumni done? How are they engaged in the world at large? Is there an opportunity to engage with them and to further develop and extend your commercial and your school's profile by linking in with that provenance? And the fifth asset class, which is where every single school and every single person I start talking to starts when they think about commercial, is buildings and facilities. And those buildings and facilities support the other asset classes. Without the buildings and facilities, you probably won't deliver education unless you're doing it online. You definitely won't deliver co-curricular unless you're partnering and borrowing someone else's resources. You don't have very much to give or share in community and public benefit or in terms of any other partnerships you might develop. And your provenance is probably linked to your buildings and facilities, but not necessarily. It could exist beyond that because you may have moved school or buildings and facilities during the time of the school's existence. Either way, the buildings and facilities support that overall group of assets. They're not the be all and end all. So that's a bit about my view on commercial and commercial activities and where the opportunities lie for commercial extensions to the school's brand. But in this particular example that I'm sharing with you now, the school has a very distinct brand ethos and face to the world. And alongside that, the school's enterprise division exists. And it's normally called something rather school enterprise. So it's called, I don't know, let's use Harrow School Enterprises Limited, because that's a good example. And that they're now shortening it to HSEL. I'll come back to that later on in the presentation. But what I really wanted to focus on here was to say, generally speaking, what's happened through history and for all sorts of, in those days, good historical reason, not least of all that commercial revenue was seen to be slightly grubby. So did we really want our parents to know that we were sweating our assets? I think our parents would be delighted to know they're sweating the assets in today's climate, today's economic climate. They'd be very happy not to dig deeper into their pockets to put little Jimmy or Jane at school in England. So I think it's really important that we understand why we've ended up with these two separate entities, and to raise the question as to whether those two separate entities in their current partnership format are right, or whether we should be looking not at a house of brands, but a single branded house with co-commercials seen as yet another asset in the overall approach of the school and the school brand to its external audiences. On the one hand, students who are at school for 2/3 of the year, sitting behind a desk and learning, and then other opportunities around the piece, those other commercial opportunities I've talked about. It's not right or wrong to do either, just to be clear. However, I think it needs to be a conscious decision, and the marketing team should be driving that conscious decision. The marketing team should be thinking very clearly about how it is they want whatever they're doing in what I call the co-commercial space. You'll see it's changed from enterprise to co-commercial, and I'll come back to that later. And they should be looking at it and saying, how do we want that to be integrated into what the school's doing? Or do we not? Do we want it to be two separate things? And I'm going to give you some examples as to how that works. If I was sitting in front of you face to face, which I'm not, unfortunately, I'd ask you to tell me where this is. However, I shall tell you where it is. And the reason I share this picture is because when I tell you where it is, you'll probably go, aha, yes, I can see that. It's Harrow. I can't remember what they call this room. It doesn't really matter, but it's at Harrow School. It has fantastic views behind, as it were, on the other wall looking out over London. And that brings me to the next picture in this sequence, which is Harrow School Enterprises Limited. Excellence in everything. Well, I think that resonates with the Harrow brand. It is, however, a separate brand. You'll see top left, Harrow School Enterprises Limited. And I think it may even have changed to HSEL now. And it'll be interesting to see where it goes into the future. But it instinctively still says Harrow to me. It's still very much in the genre of Harrow, in the look and feel, the tone, style, etc. And there is the Harrow brand itself, Harrow School, the school brand. And within that, you can actually link back to HSEL, Harrow School Enterprises as well. However, they are two separate entities, and they are billed and positioned as such to their buying audiences. And that to some extent is historic, I think, rather than by design. In fact, I know it's historic rather than by design. It was by design historically. It may change into the future. If you have a look at this one, it's another example of where a conscious decision has been made around the branding. I'm not going to ask you to guess where that is because you won't have a clue. It looks like any other school in, what was that, 1565 or something, if I can read that correctly. It then evolved, 1565. It then evolved to this at some point in time in the school's history, and it has now evolved to that. It's quite clear and quite straightforward and probably more explicit than the other two logos, identities, brands, whatever you want to call them, that were used by Highgate in the past. Now, Highgate made a very clear decision when they were looking at their branding in relation to their commercial activities. That's the Highgate brand, nice, fun school brand, lots of happy, smiling kids. It says as it is, and it has a very modern and appealing front to it. That is, although still endorsed by Highgate, in fact, if you get further into it, is their sports offering to the external audience. So they have developed very consciously this thing called Mallinson Sports. And when you ask them, why did you go down this Mallinson Sport route? Totally different branding, bears very little, in fact, no resemblance or no affiliation with Highgate at all. So if you were Joe Public looking to find a sports centre in North London, you might come across something called Mallinson Sports, and you could well apply to Mallinson Sports to become a member of Mallinson Sports. Why did they do this? Why did they not stick with Highgate Sports or whatever, something along those lines? Because they felt that in order to get Joe Public in North London to come and participate as a paying member of the Mallinson, of their sports facility, they had to differentiate the brand from Highgate, which they felt was too distant, too unreachable for Joe Public living in North London. Now, whether they're right or wrong doesn't matter. The point is they thought very clearly about it, carefully about it, and strategically they made a decision to differentiate their sports brand from the school's brand. As I say, there is still an endorsement factor to some extent, because as you can see, you can find that within the Highgate website, etc., but it's very definitely branded Mallinson Sports. So where does that leave us in terms of going forward? I'm actually going to move. Oh, sorry, I'm going to use that. So this is one last example. The Schools Enterprise Association is a good example of a similar thing to Mallinson Sports. The Schools Enterprise Association was founded, just for reference, as background, by me in 2019, and as a members-owned association. I don't own it. The members own it. The members kindly pay me to run it for them, but they own it. And the Schools Enterprise Association, that's a new brand. That's the second brand we've had in 3 years, but never mind. Actually, we quite like it. Provides support, guidance, and knowledge, as it says on the tin, for its members. However, when someone wants to hire a venue at a school, they're unlikely to approach the Schools Enterprise Association, because frankly, to most people outside of probably the group that are in front of me and other people involved in schools, enterprise in schools means nothing. They have no idea what that means. They really don't have a clue. So they're unlikely to go, I'd like to have a wedding, and just to use a very simple example, at a school, hi, the SEA, do you have any venues for weddings? We don't get inquiries like that. We don't expect to. The brand is not positioned like that. The Schools Enterprise Association is a members association supporting members in the work that they do. However, to get people to actually try and use the Schools Enterprise Association members' facilities, we do have an inquiries portal, and that inquiries portal is Beautiful Schools. And that portal showcases beautiful schools. Some of them aren't very beautiful, some of them are ugly, but any schools, anything's beautiful to them that want to buy it. It showcases those facilities and those venues to the buying public. So it's a differentiated brand from the Schools Enterprise Association. It's intentionally built as such, and our inquiries for a wedding venue, conference venue, summer school activity, whatever it might be, come through the Beautiful Schools portal. Totally separate brand, linked to the SEA only in as much as it exposes our members' assets to a buying audience through this portal. So hopefully that's given you some food for thought around your brands and how your brands do or don't work together, and what it is you might want to do with your brands going forwards. And I would strongly recommend that the first thing you do is look at your target audiences. Who are you trying to talk to? Who are you trying to reach? And why are you trying to reach them? And that, in turn, should inform how it is you brand and develop your different commercial offerings and how they fit into the school's overall brand. I was at a school, doesn't matter where it was, recently, and I was talking to them about their assets and linked to that what their vision for the future was. Where did they want to go as a school? What was their overarching strategic objective? And their overarching strategic objective was to put more boarders into their sixth form boarding house, basically, in their sixth form facility, and to fill up sixth form with more boarders. Now, actually, potentially the commercial activities could dovetail very neatly into that. If you start to look at things, pick them up maybe at GCE level with GCSE level with GCSE revision courses, etc. Give them an introduction to English boarding for the international market coming into English boarding in the sixth form. We know that a large portion of students come in the sixth form, and then bring that through the school with the boarding, etc. But all of the commercial activities linked to that, such as GCSE revision, taste of English boarding, holiday programs, revision courses, etc., could provide commercial revenue for that school, as well as fulfilling the school's overarching objective to bring in more boarders into the sixth form. And it may well save schools such as that from some very serious financial difficulties that could face them in the very near future. So in so doing, they would be very foolish to go down the Mallinson sports route or the beautiful schools route and call it anything other than School X provision and GCSE revision or whatever, or some English boarding experience or whatever it might be. They would use the school's brand. They would be totally integrated as a branded house rather than a house of brands. I'm going to ignore that. So the question around the branded house and the house of brands, just to refresh us, is in the branded house environment, we would have everything linked to the single overarching brand, which is the school's brand, and we'd be looking to enhance and create what I call a halo effect around that brand by deriving commercial revenues from the school's considerable assets, whether they're education, co-curricular, or whatever they might be. In the house of brands, you're going to do something slightly different. So I ask you to stand back and look carefully at your school and where you want to be and how you're going to deliver that. And linked to that, the first question you're probably going to ask, and I just before I get into the next slide, I am also passionate about the fact that I think the marketing teams in schools should be far more integrated with the commercial activities in schools. All too often what we're getting is marketing does bluntly student recruitment, and everything else is left to the individual. So the enterprise team are left doing marketing their own activities in parallel with what the school does in terms of its marketing. That is going to send out dissonant messages at best. At worst, it's going to create a very clear house of brands, because the two brands are not going to work together, because there isn't oversight over the entire entity. And I think even in the Coca-Cola example, right at the very top, there will be somebody sitting in the Coca-Cola Corporation, and there is a central marketing team who have oversight over how these brands are developed and how the branded houses within the Coca-Cola Corporation evolve, and where they spin out separate brands into their house of brands. And I would urge marketing teams in schools to get a grip on what's happening in the commercial arena, to work with their commercial and enterprise partners in schools, and to make sure that there's synergy and to support them in moving forward, because it's not just about commercial revenues. It's about increased school numbers. It's about improving the school's brand and profile. It's about creating opportunity through the commercial activity at schools, and they should be done in synergy rather than in parallel, and potentially doing this rather than even that. So what is your enterprise brand? And the interesting thing here is, what does enterprise actually mean? Enterprise means a project or undertaking that is especially difficult, complicated, or risky. A unit of economic organization, activity, etc. Well, that means diddly squat to the person who wants to have a wedding in your school, or the person who wants to potentially send their daughter to a sixth form, English sixth form opportunity. Enterprise, you wouldn't be going to an enterprise. It's anybody enterprises summer school, would you, or revision course? So you need to think very carefully about it. So Harrow School Enterprises Limited, sorry, Harrow, I'm using you as an example here, actually doesn't mean anything to their audience, frankly. It does now, because they've entrenched it over time. So people know that if they want to do something at a school and their ongoing partners, etc., will go to Harrow School Enterprises. But actually what Harrow School Enterprises have done is spin out other brands. They've now got a summer school brand, etc., etc. I'm not going to go into the Harrow example in any more depth now, but I think you need to ask the question, what is it that you want to do with your enterprise brand, and what does that look like? I'm going to give you another example now. In this school, Does anyone know where that school is? And you're all on mute, and we're all sitting in an online conference, so I can't actually ask you the question. But again, in person, I'd ask you the question. Martin Park Mansion wedding brochure. Goodness me, well, that just looks like a stately home somewhere. No idea. Is it linked to a school? No idea. Do I care? Not really, but it's a mansion and it looks nice. And Martin Park sounds great as well. And the wedding brochure is very nice. However, if you look deeper into it, it's Woldingham School venue hire. So Martin Park is the original house at Woldingham School. So that house is actually in the center of a school. But they've cleverly, just going back, branded this and extended that brand into the wedding market by focusing on Martin Park Mansion. Why? Because a bride doesn't really want to get married at Woldingham School unless they're an alumna and happen to have a very close affinity with the school. But a bride might consider something called Martin Park Mansions if it happens to be on the edge of the M25, easily accessible, and provide the sort of venue they're looking for. That's the Woldingham School brand, which has got nothing, as you can see, the relationship between that and that is not a lot, really. There's not much correlation between the two, if any, at all. Intentionally so, very cleverly intentionally so. And then recently, Woldingham School has been looking at how they can extend the use of some of their grounds. And one of the things they've got is a massive forest. Many of you will have a similar sort of thing, woodland. And what they've done is they have developed a zipline activity, but that zipline activity is not focused, as you can see, because Woldingham is a senior girls' school on senior girls. That's a little chap. That's a local chap in the local area. And it's called Woldingham Adventure. Again, school, it says at Woldingham School there, it's underpinned by the school brand, but the school brand is not the hero. Woldingham Adventure is the hero brand that they're trying to establish. It's endorsed by Woldingham School. It has a very different feel. It has an energized, adventurous feel, and it's clearly a zipline. And that hopefully appeals to the local public, and the local public are coming into it. So they've taken some very clear strategic decisions around their branding and how they establish their branding. But what you haven't seen in any of that is anything called Woldingham School Enterprises Limited. Now, it may be, and I think it is, true to say, in fact, it's called Martin Park Enterprises. There is an entity, a legal entity called Martin Park Enterprises Limited, which is the same as Harrow School Enterprises Limited. It has the same functionality. It derives it commercial. It manages the commercial revenues. But nobody, the bride doesn't need to know that. Certainly nobody going to Woldingham Adventure needs to know that. So think carefully about how your enterprise brand is expressed within the context of your school. And I'm now running out of time, so I'm going to whiz through the last, but your enterprise brands and how you actually address them are very important. I'm not going to take you through that, and I'm not going to take you through share of voice, except to say that you need to think of this carefully in terms of share of voice as well, because it is much easier to have share of voice by spinning out a separate entity than battle within the same entity for share of that single entity's voice. And those who are sitting in the marketing teams right now are not engaging with enterprise and not engaging with, I don't know, marketing the summer school, providing an opportunity, an ongoing opportunity for people to attract people to summer camps, whatever else it might be, that you're doing from a commercial point of view. It's quite hard to find room within the share of voice in the overall entity unless your strategic objectives are totally aligned and your brand is totally aligned. So it simply becomes an add-on or another way of expressing that particular brand. And as I said, creating that halo effect around the brands. So co-commercial sitting heart and center around the piece in terms of the assets that school's brand takes to market, whatever that market may be. So there we go. I'm going to stop sharing so I can at least hopefully see some people, although most of you are hiding behind some black screens, so I can't see you at all. I said I'd leave you some room for questions, and I think you have about 0 minutes, but if I can steal those 4 minutes that you offered me, Alicia, then I can take some questions.